2 minutes past, so we'll get started. So yeah, I'd just like to welcome everybody this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, really excited about this session and hope you are too. So we're really delighted to be joined by Eloise this evening. Eloise is a therapist, author and teacher amongst many other things. And in this session, she'll take us through some simple, effective wellness tools to help us cope kind of with everyday self-care practices, with our mind, our body and ourself. So yeah, Eloise will share some practical kind of actionable ways that we can help ourselves when we're having kind of a bad day or feeling quite griefy, and we'll end with a gentle meditation to end the session. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Eloise.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I hope this is going to be a useful session. Obviously, please type in the chat, make it as interactive as you want. Let me know if you want me to focus on something in a little more detail, or if you want me to cover a specific topic or anything. But yeah, I can start by giving you a bit of background about myself and my work, and then I do have some slides. They don't have much info on them, but I'll share those in a sec. So yeah, I'm Eloise. I started my career in corporate law, actually, so I've had a bit of a career change over the last few years, but now I am a therapist. I focus on a field called existential therapy, which is really about finding meaning and purpose in everyday life. I don't know if you've ever come across the book Man's Search for Meaning by someone called Viktor Frankl, but that's really where the field is centered around his work, and then a lot of other people who have worked around these topics after him. And yeah, so I'll touch on a little bit of existential therapy and the practices that come from that field. But I'm also trained in yoga, meditation, mindfulness, fitness, stuff like that. So I'm going to touch on a few of those practical things as well. And yeah, and then the self element, so we'll do mind, that's kind of the meaning focused stuff. We'll do body, that's the more meditation, embodiment type practices. And then the final category that I normally teach around is something I call self, which is more I guess you would maybe associate them with a little more spiritual practices, or just real personal type well-being practices. So to give you a little bit of background on that, I actually trained in a monastic community for a year. So I picked up a lot of these monastic sort of traditional spiritual practices. And yeah, I like playing around with them, seeing how they can be used in a non-spiritual setting. So kind of bringing them back into the practical. And yeah, I have a new book out in April, which is what I'm teaching from. These are the categories that are in this book. And this book is called But Are You Alive? And it's called How to Design a Life Worth Living. So it's this is where the practices come from. So yeah, again, it's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to share my screen. But yeah, if you, I'll give you a chance to kind of work through some of these practices as we go. But if you do have any kind of practical thoughts or stuff you want to type in the chat, please go for it. And yeah, let me see if I can do this. Okay, here we go. So the Purpose Workshop is the name of my business, which is why this is up here, but it's not really what we're working through today. So okay, we talked about the main categories, which are mind, body and self. And I think I explained a little bit about what I see in each of those, although obviously these categories are a bit more fluid than perhaps you can put them into boxes. They tend to be a bit more the mind practices lead into everything else, same with body and same with self. So we'll just see how it goes with those categories. Okay, so this is the field, to give you a little bit of background, and I spoke about Viktor Frankl's work, but this is really the field that I focus my personal therapy practice around. And it's the idea of existentialism, so finding a meaning or a purpose in life. And a lot of this field is centered around the idea that we as human beings have the freedom to make our own choices in life. And there's a quote that's often circulated. It's actually normally attributed to Viktor Frankl, but I think it's someone else said it. But it's basically summing up Frankl's ideas, which is the idea that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, human beings have the freedom to make their own choices. So that's kind of the theories that lie behind this field, is we're faced with all sorts of things that come our way, and we often feel we respond in a really instinctive way. We kind of just respond with coping mechanisms, or we respond to things in an immediate way. But this field focuses around the idea that we might have some freedom to make our decisions, to determine our actions, to create a little bit of space and structure in our own lives just by making our own choices. So that's kind of the philosophy behind this field, but there are a lot more practical things as well. And this is the specific field of therapy that I'm trained in, which is like existential therapy. Who am I? What am I meaning? What's the meaning of my life? What are my values? Like, what is my identity? Things like that. And just to mention, Viktor Frankl's field in particular is called logotherapy. Logos means like meaning or purpose, and so it's like the therapy of finding meaning. And it's a really good book if you feel like picking up a book. Viktor Frankl's On Search for Meaning is obviously an amazing sort of an application of the principles that he formulated in his own life. So about Viktor Frankl, he was a prisoner in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. He was actually already a psychiatrist, so he'd been working on these ideas for a while. But when he was in prison, he really saw the idea of finding meaning and purpose in a very traumatic situation, and tried to apply some of his ideas in practice. So that's where this field of work comes from. All right, so let's jump into the first category, which is mind. And the first exercise that I normally work with clients is something called the meaning tracker. And this again is something that comes from logotherapy. So this is like a Viktor Frankl type exercise. And if you have a pen and paper, it would be great if you could maybe have a try of this for yourself, or you can just come back to it later or just think about it. It doesn't really matter. But normally what we do in this exercise is make 5 main categories. And the headings are people, places, objects, experiences, and hopes. So those are like your headings. If you're making like a table, you could put those at the top. So again, it would be people, places, objects, experiences, and hopes. I could probably write that in the chat. I actually can't see the chat anymore. Hang on. Where'd it go? All right. Oh, sorry. Okay. I think because my screen's on like. Okay, wait, I can't see the chat anymore, but never mind. You guys can maybe type that out for yourself. 1 second. Okay, yeah, so the categories are people, places, objects, experiences, and hopes. And the idea with the meaning tracker is that you would sort of track through maybe like a week in your life, or even like 2 weeks if that doesn't seem long enough, or a month, or it doesn't. Oh, okay, the chat is up. Cool. Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, even 2 weeks if that doesn't feel long enough, or if you feel like you need more time to reflect on it. And you sort of track back through all of these categories, and under each of these headings, you would just list out all of the things that fall into those categories that give you a sense of personal meaning or purpose, or that feel like really connected to who you are as a person. So obviously for people, it could be like the people that you have around you, or even people that you encounter in your day-to-day life. It doesn't necessarily have to be like the people you're closest to, but people who give you a sense of like meaning, or people who you feel some kind of connection to. So that could be someone at work, or it could be someone within this kind of community, not necessarily like your closest people, but just people that you connect with on a more personal level, who you feel share something of meaning or of value to you. Same with places. So that could be, it doesn't have to be places that you're currently in. It could be like the place where you were born, or the place where you went to school, or where you grew up, or a place where you had a really meaningful relationship, or even just a place that you feel connected to, like a place that you love in nature or something like that. And you list all these places out under that column. And then objects, this is kind of stuff that you have around you that has meaning for you. And again, you can do this by tracking through like the last week of your life and remembering what it was, like which objects, a piece of jewelry or a memento, or, you know, a photo or something. But you can also track back even further and think like, what are the objects I've had around me in the past that either you have or you don't have anymore, that have given you a sense of value or meaning or purpose. And then same with experiences. So that's obviously things like an event or an occasion or a memory that you have of a particular time, or it could be more like a reoccurring experience, like every week you come to a community event like this, and that's something that gives you real meaning, or, you know, gives you a sense of purpose. And then hopes, that one is more for the future, so it's a little future orientated. Actually, one of the ways this work is distinguished often from more traditional therapeutic methods is that existential therapy is very future focused. So it often focuses on like who you want to become, what you want to do, what you think about your own future, what you want to craft in the future for yourself. So under this column, you would put like everything that you hope for the future that kind of gives you a sense of meaning and purpose. So maybe that's like moving jobs, or like moving house, or even like settling into the time of your life that you're in now, or something like that. Things that give you a sense of like meaningful hope for the future go under that column. And I guess the idea with this exercise, it doesn't really have like a set goal. So you're not meant to like achieve anything from really any of these exercises. It's more just like an ability for you to observe, or for you to notice the things in your life that give you a sense of meaning. And there's a couple of things you can learn from it. Obviously, number one, you gather together all of the things that are giving you a sense of meaning in your life at the moment. So you develop this holistic picture of like where you're finding meaning. And then if you see, as you track through this, if you're making a list or something, if you can see, oh, actually, I have loads of like meaningful places in my life, but I don't have that many meaningful experiences, something like that. You can sort of see the discrepancies in maybe where you want to restructure your life for the future, or maybe you have a lot of meaningful like people and places right now, but you don't have that many meaningful like hopes, or you're not as future focused as you are like present focused. So that might be an indicator of like, maybe you could focus a little more time thinking and planning ahead, or like crafting a vision for the future that seems meaningful to you. And again, there's no real right or wrong way of doing any of this. It's kind of just a practice of observation. But it can help you to rebalance some of these categories. And again, if there are categories that you feel like are missing, or that you wanted to add something a little extra, you obviously can amend this however you want to as well. So yeah, that is the meaning tracker. Oh yeah, and then the other thing that I think is helpful with this is, if you do it once and then you give it a little bit of time, step away from it for a while, come back to it and add stuff over time, so it becomes more like a living document. And it's just an ability for you to track your life over time and see like where your life is shaped and formed and how it's evolving over time. It can just be a really insightful practice to do. So that is the meaning tracker. I actually can't see the time on my screen, but we'll just keep going. I actually might grab my phone. 1 second. I'll just grab the phone. All right, now I have a sense of time. And sorry if it looks like I'm in a fitness studio. This is where I live at home. I teach fitness from my house, so that's why there's a ballet bar in the background, if you're wondering what on earth that is. Okay, so this second one is a values exercise. And values are really important in existential therapy. Viktor Frankl, the formulator of these exercises, he really thought that values were what shaped the human being, and what distinguished his particular field of therapy from other therapies like Jungian or Freudian, or Alfred Adler was another therapist that maybe some of you have come across his work before. But Viktor Frankl was very focused on the human being as like a sort of spiritual, meaning-focused, meaning-seeking person. And he thought that values fall into 3 categories. So the main categories are, number 1, creative values. Number 2, experiential values. And number 3, attitudinal values. So these are his categories. Obviously, you can make your own categories of values as well. But some examples would be, creative values can include drawing, writing, painting, design, construction, architecture, things like that, like love of the arts. Experiential values include things like falling in love, nature, culture, music, drama, poetry, reading, playing games, or sports. And attitudinal values include your beliefs, your mindsets, and your worldviews, things that you believe about the world, or things that, like, mindsets that you have about yourself and your life and how the world is. So again, those 3 categories. Oh, now I can access it. I'm going to put them in there. So number 1, creative. Number 2, experiential. Number 3, attitudinal. I hope I spelled that right. Attitudinal. So yeah, then the exercise that you can do with these values, I mean, there are lots of different exercises, but one of the main ones that you can do, just again as a process of observation, is to just make 3 boxes: creative, experiential, and attitudinal. And in those boxes, you just gather all your values together. So you just write a long list of like the things that you value in those categories. So again, under creative, you can write your love of art or nature, or like sports or whatever, like creating things, creation. Under experiential, again, is like the experience type values. And under attitudinal, it could be if you have values like honesty or loyalty or love, or whatever it is. So you're just making a long list of values. And actually at the back of this book, I have a whole checklist of values. So let me read you a couple just so that you have a sense of like what these can look like. And again, this is such a personal exercise that everyone has a different interpretation, but some main values that I often see people come up with. You've got things like freedom or openness or authenticity, growth, integrity, creativity, I mentioned that one, community, solitude, consistency, equality, teamwork, things like that. So yeah, you can, if you get a bit stuck with, you're not quite sure what your core values are, you can just look up online like examples of core values, and then you can gather inspiration from some of those. But yeah, the exercise is essentially like a gathering of all of those values. And then the idea is to see where they occur in your life. So what you're looking for, I guess, is a sense of consistency between the values that you put down on paper and the values that you take back into your everyday life. So if you can, if you make a list of your values, if you can over the next, say like month or something, see what happens when you come into opportunities to apply those values. Let's say one of your values is like community, and you're given opportunities to like be in community or be in solitude. Like those are your choices. Do I go to an event like this, or do I spend an evening like doing something else on my own? And then I guess the opportunity would be for you to see if you're applying your values consistently in everyday life. And again, it's not really like a right or wrong thing. You're not really meant to like do it perfectly. There's no like achievement or certificate for doing your values well in everyday life. It's more just like an exploratory exercise to see if you live in a way that is consistent with the things that you believe about yourself and about the world. And yeah, it can be a really helpful, insightful, and quite grounding practice to apply. So it's just a nice sort of like existential exercise to try out. So yeah, that's your values. And then, yeah, it's okay not to have the perfect answer or any answer. And a big aspect of this field of therapy is that there isn't really a perfect answer to any of these questions. As I'm sure all of us have wondered, like what the point of anything is, or like what the meaning of a situation is, or what the answer is. I know I have wondered many, many times what the meaning of life is, or what the purpose is. And this field of existential therapy is quite comforting in that it really advocates for not having like that certainty of meaning, but just for diving into these questions and like exploring them a little deeper for yourself, or kind of doing these exercises to get to know where you stand and how you see the world. So it's a much more gentle form of therapy. Yes, and absolutely forces you to be honest with yourself about how you live in the world. I think one of the nicest things about this, doing these exercises, is that it just forces you to, as they say in this field of therapy, enter a dialogue with yourself. They love this idea of being in dialogue with yourself and with the world. So it's not like seeing you as an isolated being, but seeing yourself as in conversation with your life, or in communication with who you are and how you move through the world. And this idea of finding a consistency with the things you believe about yourself and the things you would say about yourself and the way you would actually act as you move through the world. So it's a really integrated form of therapeutic practice. But yeah, so that is a little bit about existential therapy. There's obviously much more to it than that, but that's a very, very brief overview of some of the exercises that we do. And now we're going to move on to a little bit more like mind-body exercises. So the first one I often work with is meditation. And I'm sure you've all come across different forms of meditation, and it's sort of been co-opted by the wellness industry a little bit. But at its heart, meditation is a really beautiful practice that just enables you to, again, it's this similar idea of carving out a little bit of space between the things that happen to you and the way that you choose to respond to the world. So sometimes the meditation practices, they teach you to, or they train you to observe this gap between the thoughts that come into your mind and the way you respond to, or the way you encounter those thoughts. So really basic kind of simple meditation practice would be to imagine, if you had your eyes closed, for example, you can try it now if you want, or you try it later in your own practice. But imagine if you had your eyes closed and you were kind of just like settling into your body, observing your breath. One practice would be to observe the thoughts as they come across your mind. So you're thinking, what am I gonna have for dinner? Like, what emails do I need to answer? Like, what text messages have like come onto my phone and while I've been doing this meditation? And as you observe those thoughts, you sort of hold them at a little bit of a distance from yourself. So one of the ideas in meditation is that it's an observation or awareness of yourself, as if you were outside of yourself looking in. So again, it's similar to existential therapy in the sense that it sees the human being not as just something that's reacting to stimulus, but as an autonomous person who has the freedom to determine what thoughts you accept and what thoughts you embrace, and how you encounter yourself in your own life. Sometimes people use a visualization for this practice. It can be really helpful if you're a very visual learner. So the two most common visualizations that I see are either seeing the thoughts as clouds passing across your mind. So that would be if you had your eyes closed and you were just imagining like a clear sky. And then as a thought comes, you just see it as a cloud kind of passing across that sky. And instead of grabbing onto that thought and like focusing on it, for example, if you think, oh, I just remembered that I didn't buy any milk. I like really need some for my cup of tea later. Instead of like holding on to that and thinking, okay, now I need to do this, and then I'll need to go to Sainsbury's before it closes at 7 or whatever. Instead of like grabbing onto it, you're kind of just letting it pass. And you can visualize that as a cloud if it helps, like passing across the sky. And the other idea is that you can obviously pick up these thoughts later, especially if they're practical thoughts. You can like grab them later and do something with them. But the practice of meditation is almost like the observation or the awareness or the ability to create space for these thoughts as they pass through your life. And the other visualization that people often use is like visualizing a stream or visualizing a river, and the thoughts are kind of like rocks or stones or like leaves, let's say, in a really fast moving river. So that's the idea that when things pass across your mind, when a thought passes across your mind and you're in meditation, you don't like reach into the river and grab out that leaf or whatever it is that's passing. You kind of just let it flow by, and then you can think about those thoughts later. From a really practical perspective, meditation is traditionally is a daily practice. So meditation comes from several like cultural communities like Buddhism and Hinduism, and also in the more Western spiritual traditions as well, Christianity and Catholicism. And in those practices, it is practiced every single day. And it's often done multiple times a day, actually, which is fairly unrealistic for most of us. But normally it helps to have a little bit of a structure around the day. And I'm going to talk about this later when we come onto the self section of the idea of structuring your day. But people often find meditation helpful first thing in the morning or last thing in the evening. And that's generally because those are the parts of the day that you have most control over. So you may have 5 minutes in the morning, whereas you probably wouldn't have it at lunchtime or, in the working day or anything like that. So a really simple meditation practice could be, you wake up first thing in the morning, have some coffee if you need to. There's nothing that says that it needs to be like a perfect practice. It's just like whatever works for you in your life. Find somewhere comfortable to sit. It's really important that when you are doing your meditation practice, you are like physically comfortable, because it's a very mind-focused practice. And if you have distractions in your own body, like if your back is hurting or if you're on like a really uncomfortable chair, it can be a little harder to get into this state of like observational awareness. So if you can sit somewhere really comfortable, like with a cushion or with your back against a wall or on a chair or sofa or something, Ideally somewhere that you're not going to fall immediately asleep, although if you're doing it before bed, that would be all right as well. And we'll talk about body scans, which are a really nice way of actually going to sleep. So there are meditation practices that are more like sleep focused. But yeah, in the morning, sit somewhere comfortable, have a little stretch before you settle in. So maybe like give your shoulders a big roll, up, back, down and round, like sit a little bit taller through your back, maybe give your neck a gentle stretch, or whatever you feel like you need to do to sort of bring yourself into the space. Often teachers say you should have your feet on the floor. So if you're sitting, the soles of your feet should be on the floor. Obviously, if you're sitting on the floor, that's fine. You can have your back against a wall or something for a little bit of a grounding sensation. And your hands are generally on your body. So normally you have your palms down on your legs, or you can have your palms up, see how you feel, see what works best. Again, these aren't rules. They're just kind of like sort of cultural or traditional aspects that help you sort of connect with your body in a little bit of a deeper way. Set a timer, unless you want to meditate for an indefinite amount of time, in which case that can be quite nice as well if you just go for it and bring yourself out when you feel ready. But if you are on a strict schedule, just set yourself a timer, normally 5 minutes if you're starting, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Some people do a full hour in the morning. That's a little tough. When I was in training in my monastic community, we used to do an hour and a half in the morning, an hour and a half before bed, which, let me tell you, that was a little bit of a challenge. And it doesn't actually get any easier either. It's still really hard every single day, even if you do it for a year. But if you're kind of in the middle of a working day, 5 minutes is absolutely fine. 5 minutes is great. 2 minutes is great. So see how you go. And yeah, timer on your phone, something to bring you back out. And then close your eyes or soften your gaze. If you don't like closing your eyes, I know sometimes closing your eyes can be a bit intense, or it can feel a little too like internal. You can also just take what they call a soft gaze, which means looking at something but not really focusing on it. So kind of letting your eyes glaze over a little bit, but see what you prefer. And some people like to look at something while they're meditating. Traditionally, a candle is sometimes used as a bit of a visual tool. Anyway, and then, yeah, once you find your gaze or you close your eyes, normally you can start by bringing your attention to your breath. And the reason people do that first is because it's a really embodied, grounded way of like bringing yourself into the present moment, because your breath is always present. It's only ever in the present moment, your breath. It's never in the past, it's never in the future. So it's always like right there. And you always have it, no matter where you are. So it's something you can always bring your attention back to. And it just gives you like a real embodied focus. And especially if it feels hard to focus on your body or like certain parts of your body, your breath is a really just like natural ongoing thing that you can sort of grab your attention and anchor it around your breath. And yeah, the practice can start by just focusing on breathing in and out. Sometimes it helps to imagine like every time you breathe in, you can take the breath up to the crown of your head. And when you breathe out, you can take the breath all the way down into your feet. Something like that is just sort of a visualization that helps you focus. And you can also imagine every time you breathe in, your ribcage like expands a little to the side. And when you breathe out, it contracts a little. That can be quite nice focus as well. And then after you focused on your breath for a few moments, the idea or the intention at the core of these meditation practices is to just drop into the state of like present moment awareness of yourself, which sounds a little dramatic, but really what it is you're not necessarily focusing on controlling the breath or focusing on anything in particular, but you're just bringing your attention to what it actually feels like to be fully present. And again, it's this sense of like observing yourself from outside of yourself. So observing your body as if you were just noticing like the specifics of what it feels like from an outside perspective. And we will do a little meditation practice to close. So I'll go through this and you can feel, or you can try it out for yourself if you think it might be helpful. But yeah, the idea is to get to the core of like what it feels like to be fully present, fully in yourself, or like fully within yourself. And then just bring your mind to a place of like still presence. Which all of this sounds quite hard to explain, because when you put it into words, you're a bit like, well, it's all about being present, and but we'll try it practically, and then you'll feel it in your own body. It will obviously feel different for everyone, but those are some of the more traditional ideas. And then the other thing that I was going to talk about a little bit is mindfulness. So meditation and mindfulness are very similar, and often they're a bit of a Venn diagram. So like they have a huge element in the middle where they cross over, and they're basically, mindfulness is a form of meditation, and in some traditions meditation is a form of mindfulness, so it gets a bit confusing. But essentially mindfulness is meditation often applied in a more practical way. And there's a man called John Kabat-Zinn, who is the founder of modern mindfulness. He has a book called Full Catastrophe Living, which is like the biggest, it's actually a huge like textbook. So you may want to listen to the audiobook if you don't want to carry around like a giant book. But this is basically his idea of how he can apply mindfulness to the modern world. And his work was actually on trauma recovery. So it's a little more clinical. But the ideas, I think, are still used in sort of modern yoga and mindfulness practices. And the components that he set out were awareness. So awareness of yourself, awareness of your breath, awareness of the present moment, with intention. So it's got a like specific intention to the practice. And the intention is to become present or to become aware of your body and your breath. In the present moment, obviously mentioned that one. And the final component, which is really important for the mindfulness tradition, is non-judgment. So that's the idea that when you do your practice, you don't immediately think, oh, like I'm terrible at meditation, or like I'm just so bad at mindfulness, which is, as a yoga and meditation teacher, I hear that all the time. People say like, oh, I can't meditate, I'm really bad at it. Which I totally relate to that, because I often feel like that as well. But funnily enough, non-judgment is like a central idea of the practice as well. So that's the idea that you actually don't form any kind of judgment about yourself or how good or bad the practice is. And there's an idea that comes from the more spiritual side of meditation, which is non-duality, which is the idea that it's not good or bad. It's sort of transcendent of both of those categories. It just is what it is. It's not like a successful meditation practice. It's not like a bad one. It just like is your practice and your practice is your practice. And every day it's a little different. And every day you practice this idea of non-judgment. And I think actually that if you practice that for a long period of time, it has a real significant impact on how you feel about yourself, this ability to detach from the immediate judgment or criticism we often make about ourselves and the way we move through the world, or, you know, our thoughts and our instincts and things. And I always thought of myself as a very self-critical person. And that was actually quite helpful to me when I was at law school, because I needed to be a little harsh on myself to do well. But it wasn't helpful to me in other areas of life. And I really this is something I actually have tried to practice intentionally for about 10 years now, every day, this idea of like non-judgmental awareness through meditation or mindfulness. And even though it's not a practice that you can't really see the differences immediately, it's not like a fitness regime where you're like, oh, now I can do the splits, or like now I can lift this weight or whatever, which is kind of frustrating because you're like, wow, I'm not really getting anywhere, but I've been doing this for 10 years. But over time now, when I think about how I think about myself, or I think about how I move through the world, this element of non-judgment has been so powerful to me, and it's just given me an ability to be more gentle with myself. And that has really changed my entire perception of how I live and like who I am, really. So that's just a little promo for mindfulness practice, if it's something that feels like it would be helpful. And yeah, mindfulness can be a seated mindfulness practice, so very similar to the meditation one I just talked about, or often now mindfulness is associated with an activity. So they talk about mindful movement. That could be going for a walk outside. And the idea is that you bring these components, the awareness, the present moment intention, the ability to observe yourself without judgment, you just bring them to whatever activity you're doing at the time. So if you're walking in nature, you notice your breath, you notice the present moment, you bring this idea of non-judgmental awareness to your body and to yourself and to your thoughts. And that's called, I guess, a moving mindfulness practice. And obviously things like yoga as well, moving meditation practice. And yeah, one really classical mindfulness practice that people often talk about is the idea of like the mindful mindful eating or like mindful drinking. That can be quite nice if you're like having a cup of tea and you try to practice a mindfulness practice alongside it, because it gives you an opportunity to apply all of those principles to a real like immediate activity. So for example, if you're making a cup of tea and you wanted to do it with applying your mindfulness practice, you would walk over to the kettle, like feel the sensation of your feet on the floor, feel the sensation of your body moving as you walk, feel what it feels like to like fill up the kettle, notice the sensation of the water, or like the like what it smells like, what it sounds like, what it I was going to say taste like, but you probably want to wait until you've made your tea to taste the water. But yeah, all of the sensations that you're going through as you're filling up the kettle, and then you're observing it as it's boiling, and you're just bringing your attention to the sights, the sounds, the smells, like this quality of attention in the present moment. And then when you have your cup of tea, again, the attention or the awareness that you can bring to the present moment as you're drinking it, stuff like that. This is normally what mindfulness is associated with, these ideas of like a mindful activity. And if you're interested in this, there are hundreds of exercises online, so you only have to Google like mindful tea drinking and you'll find like 10,000 teachers trying to teach you this kind of thing. So okay, Kevin asks, can we ever find ourselves? Oh, good question. That's a big question, since everyone and everything is changing all the time. Yeah, good question. I mean, lots of traditions have a different view of what the self actually means. So in the kind of existential exercises that we talked about at the beginning, they're not necessarily spiritual exercises. So they believe that you have a core self that we would associate as, you know, as normal humans walking around the world, that we think we know ourselves and who we are, our identities. And that's the idea of like finding meaning and purpose and values and like crafting your identity in the world. These practices, meditation and mindfulness, are a little different when it comes to the self, because a lot of them are based around traditions that don't really believe in the idea of a ego type self. So for example, with like Buddhist practices, they generally believe that what you're encountering or what you're practicing when you're doing these kind of practices is the transcendence of the like physical layer of the self and a connection with something deeper, or like a spiritual kind of oneness, which again is not necessarily something we see in the Western culture. We often believe that we are like individuals who are kind of moving through the world on our own in isolated little like segments. And it can be quite hard to encounter these ideas. They show up in Hinduism as well, of like non-duality, and the idea that you actually don't have a self, like you mentioned, because people are always changing, they're always transient. And in the tradition that I come from, which is like more Western Christianity and Catholicism, there they believe that you have a self, but it's directed towards a greater connection with like the divine or with a greater purpose. So yeah, to answer your question really badly, sorry about that. Lots of traditions would see would like see the self in different ways. So I guess it depends which angle you're coming at it from. But yeah, it's a good question, a very interesting one. And yeah, absolutely, people change under pressure all the time. That was one of the things that Viktor Frankl noticed actually in the concentration camps that he talked about, his own experience in there of like how people adapted to circumstances. And his theory was kind of like, if you give people the freedom to choose, they can often make a decision that aligns more with their deepest, like who they are at the core of their being. And that's the idea of like maybe formulating a gap between the things that come your way and the way you react to them. And the bigger and stronger you can make that gap, the more you can make choices that align with your identity and your values. And that's why it's helpful to do some of these value-based exercises, so you know who you want to be, and then you can make choices that align with that, if that makes sense. So yeah. Final thing that I'm going to touch on quite briefly here is body scans, and we'll do one of these at the end, so I'll like take you through this one actually, because it's a nice way to kind of just like close off. Hopefully you don't have to go back to work after this session, but like close off the end of your day. It's quite a nice like restorative practice. But body scans come from the more embodied type of meditation, so from the yoga and meditation traditions, and it's the idea of kind of taking a scan of your body and just seeing what you can observe and crafting a deeper connection to your body and the sensations of your body. And they can be really, really nice for going to sleep. If you are like struggling to sleep, or you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't get back to sleep, it can be it's quite a methodical practice. It has a bit of a rhythm and a flow to it. And so it's one of those things that you can have in your toolkit to try out if you are wanting to try it. So we'll come on to that later. Okay. And then finally, we're going to go through a section which I struggle to title sometimes, because I want to a little bit call it like spirituality, but not in a spiritual sense. So I normally call it self. But these are like spiritual practices that you can maybe try out in a non-spiritual way. It doesn't matter if you are religious or not, if you have your own religious practices. Obviously, some of these can be sort of brought together, or you can take inspiration from different elements of these as well. But this first one is the practice of Sabbath. This is traditionally like a Jewish and older Christian practice, which is the idea that your weeks and your days have a rhythm to them. And this is, I think, one of the things we really lack in the modern world, which is the sense of having a rhythm or like a pace to your weeks and to your life. Because often in the modern world, we're encouraged to just go for it, like 7 days a week. Maybe you work 7 days a week, maybe you work 5 days a week, but then your weekends are like full of stuff that you didn't get to do during the week, or, you know, you're just like full on all the time. And occasionally we have like a holiday, or we have Christmas or something where we can just chill for a few days. But in some more older spiritual traditions, they believe that the human being is meant to operate on like a little bit of a rhythm or a cycle. And there was actually some research that was kind of related to this idea, that was like, it was about animals that were kept in a zoo, and they monitored them to see what would happen if they put them on display 7 days a week. And they found that there were like so many negative physical consequences for the animals if they didn't have like a kind of rhythm where they were like kind of on and kind of off. Like they had a few days like being on display, and they had a few days like sort of just being out of the public eye, I guess. And that's sometimes used to indicate that, you know, there is a little bit of a rhythm built into like who we are as humans, or there could be anyway in some cultures. So Sabbath is the idea traditionally of having 6 days that are on and 1 day that is off. And that seventh day is said to have kind of like a holy quality to it, or a sacred quality to it. Sabbath is really, really hard to observe in the modern world, because we often need to do things with our weekends. In the Jewish tradition, it would often be on a Friday to Saturday, and in the Christian tradition, often a Sunday. But it's really, really difficult to have a day in a week where you're like, this is my day and I'm going to treat it differently, because obviously we have to live in a society that doesn't always respect that. But what you can do to try and formulate this kind of Sabbath rhythm in your life is have your activities or have your exercises that make you feel deeply connected to who you are. And again, you can find these through doing like the meaning tracker or the values exercise. If you know, for example, that having an hour walk in nature, or having a catch up with a friend or a family member, or doing some art or writing poetry, or whatever it is that makes you feel fully alive and connected to who you are. Once you know what that is, carving out a time, it doesn't have to be a whole day, but it could be like a morning or an afternoon in your week where you're going to think about doing that activity, and like taking time away from like the rest of the rhythm of your week to carve out this kind of sacred or special time that is different from the other days of your week. Yeah, and it could be a whole day, but it could also just be a morning, and it can be flexible, and it doesn't need to be every week. But this idea of like formulating a structure or rhythm to your life. And again, there's no right or wrong way of doing this in your life. So if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work for you. But if it does, then it could be really helpful. And let me just read you, there's a really beautiful discussion of Sabbath, which I wanted to include in my book. Yeah, so this is from an Oliver Sacks, the neurologist who was a New York Times writer. He wrote in an essay for the New York Times, the peace of the Sabbath, of a stopped world, a time outside time, was palpable. It infused everything. And I found myself drenched with a wistfulness, wondering what if A and B and C had been different? What sort of person might I have been? What sort of a life might I have lived? And so what he's saying is like the Sabbath, he was a he practiced like a more traditional Jewish Sabbath practice. But what it gave to him was an opportunity to pause, have a time outside of time, as he referred to it, and reflect on like how things could have been, who he was going to be in the future. This idea of like carving out a space in your week that is different from the other times in your week, if that makes sense. So again, it's all up for interpretation, but it could be something that is helpful. Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm just about to get on to monastic stuff. So yeah, good timing. So this final one, I think this is the final one before we do a little meditation. This one is called bookend practices. And this is something that I drew from my monastic time. And I was part of a monastic community for a year. It was what they call experimental monasticism, which is like these new communities that are often growing up a lot around London now and across the world as well. But the idea that you spend maybe a year in a monastic community and then you go back into your everyday life. Obviously, in traditional monastic communities, you're in there for life. You make a lifelong commitment, and then that's where you are. But now, you know, monastic practices can be practiced outside of the monastery as well. And this is one of the, I mean, there are lots and lots of meaningful practices that I took away, but one of the ones that was really resonated with me was this idea of bookend practices. And this is the idea of bookending your day. So you have a practice at the first thing you do in the morning, and the last thing you do in the evening is your spiritual practice, or it doesn't have to be, you don't have to call it spiritual if you don't want to, but your personal practice. So in the monastic community, obviously your days have a set rhythm. So you get up at a certain time every day, you do your hours of prayer, you spend a lot of time in community. So you're often like doing your prayer in community. Your days have a set like structure to them, and then you end them in a certain day. And again, that can be really satisfying in a world that often feels like it's way out of our control. You just wake up and you're immediately inundated with like stuff that you have to do, or like emails or whatever you're up to, or, you know, things can feel a little overwhelming even at the best of times. So this idea of crafting for yourself a structure to your day, for me, I found this really powerful. And in the monastic tradition, the day would start with a moment of silence or stillness. Again, similar to the meditation practices. In monastic traditions, it's often called contemplation instead of meditation, but it's basically a similar idea. And you would sit and you would pause, you'd find a moment of silence, you connect to your breath, you'd maybe close your eyes. And this is the first thing you're doing before you do anything else in your day. You're just sitting with yourself. Yeah, you're maybe reflecting on what you want to do that day. You can do things like set an intention for your day. If you pray, you say a prayer normally to open the day. And you can do things like formulate a certain like energy for your day. So you can set an intention that could be, today I just really want to be present with myself, or today I want to really pay attention, or today I want to, you know, be in community, or, you know, whatever you have for your day, like small things that you can formulate, like a small intention at the beginning of your day. And that's the first thing you do in the day. And then the last thing you do in the day is a practice called the examen. This comes from sort of Ignatian and also Benedictine spirituality. These are like Christian monastic practices. But the examen is like a review of the day. So it's like you pause and you sit again with yourself. They often say like you turn the lights down, so you get like the lighting real low. This is the last thing you're going to do before you go to bed. So like candles, low lighting, you're like ready to go, like ready to close out your day. And you also enter silence after you do this practice. So it's the very last thing you say, your last like your last sentence of the day. If you're with like a partner or like family, you might have to tell them you're about to do this in case they're like wondering why you've just gone into silence. But in monastic communities, it's called the Great Silence, and it means that your practice is the last thing, the last speaking you have for the day. And so yeah, you don't feel like you are sort of like hovering any part of your body, so you feel fully grounded. And then if you can, you just give your shoulders like a big roll up, back, down, and round. You can do that like a few times, like all the way up, back, down, and round. And then once you've rolled your shoulders out a few times, just see if you can set your shoulders slightly back and down your spine. So you're sitting a little taller. And sometimes we think of the spine as being quite light. So instead of like slumping, it's a feeling of slight lift through your back. And again, it doesn't need to be like a perfectly upright position, but just like a nice lift through your spine. And then you can think of softness in your shoulders and just like softness in your neck and around your jaw. And then just bring your attention to your breath. So you can close your eyes or you can unfocus your gaze. So again, that's the idea of maybe looking at something, but not really focusing on it too much. And you can kind of just let your attention sort of drift away from things that you can see externally and just bring your attention inwards to your breath. And just notice what it feels like to breathe fully in through your nose. And you can breathe out through your mouth or your nose, whatever feels most comfortable, whatever feels natural. And then you can imagine as you're breathing in, it's almost like you're bringing the breath all the way up to the crown of your head. And as you're breathing out, you can imagine taking the breath all the way down into your hips, and then maybe even down into your legs, into the ground. So it's like a full body breath all the way up to the crown of your head. And then all the way down into your feet. And then we're going to start the practice at the soles of your feet. So without changing anything in your body or changing your gaze or changing anything about your breath, just bring your awareness to the soles of your feet. And your eyes can stay closed and the rest of your body just stays relaxed. You're just bringing your awareness and your attention to the soles of your feet. And just see if you can scan your attention and your awareness up and down the soles of your feet. And really what you're trying to do is cultivate this ability to observe your body. So you're seeing what you can sense, what you can feel, what the sensation is of the soles of your feet against the ground. And if your feet are on the floor, you can try and feel maybe what it feels like to have your feet meet the ground. And if you're wearing shoes or socks, so just feel that sensation of like whatever it is against the soles of your feet. And then when you've had a few moments just scanning the soles of your feet, just bring your attention and your awareness up into your ankles. And again, just scanning around your ankles, seeing what you can feel. And if you can't feel anything at all, that is just the thing to notice. So that's the thing to observe, just an absence of sensation. And then just scanning your awareness up your shins, up into your calves, into your knees. Just scanning your awareness around your knees. And again, seeing if you can feel any kind of sensation. It might be like a heat or cool sensation or a tingling or a tightness or lightness or nothing at all, which again is just the thing to notice. And then scanning your awareness up into your upper legs, up into your hips. Just scanning your awareness and your attention around your lower back. And then into your stomach and your ribs. Just scanning your awareness and your attention around the side of your ribs and around the back of your ribs, just bringing your awareness to what it feels like in that part of your body. And now you can start to notice your breath again as it meets that part of your body. So when you breathe in, what happens to your rib cage? Is it like an opening or a lifting sensation or fullness or maybe a lightness? And then when you breathe out, is it like a contracting sensation or maybe a little heaviness or depth? And then scanning your awareness up into your heart center around your chest. And again, this feeling of what it is that you can notice, this ability to observe the self. And in your chest, it might feel like heavy or light or expansive or deep, or maybe even like a color comes to mind. And the quality of awareness that you're bringing to this sensation is more just like an observational quality. So you're trying to notice what it feels like, but without making a judgment. Just this ability to hold space for yourself and notice the sensations of your body. And bringing your awareness up into your shoulders, down your arms, into your wrists, And then into your hands, in the palms of your hands, in your fingers, just scanning up and down your fingers, seeing what you can notice. And then you can notice how your hands feel as they sit against your body, or if they're in your lap or in your legs, what the sensation is, if it's light or heavy or warm or cool. Then bringing your awareness back up your arms, into your shoulders, into the back of your neck, up into the crown of your head, and just holding your awareness and your attention up in the crown of your head, just bringing all of your attention and your awareness there. Now just bringing your attention and your awareness back to your breath. And now you can try and make the breath like a little more expansive. So when you breathe in, it's a real full, deep sensation. It's like your rib cage expands to the sides of the room. And then when you breathe out, like a deepening or grounding sensation. Now just start to take a few real full, deep breaths. So deep breath in through your nose. And then you can like sigh the breath out. You can go one more time like that, like a real full deep breath in through your nose. And then just like a sigh of the breath out. And then you can give your shoulders a big roll up, back, down and round, or like a couple times, up, back, down and round. And then you can open your eyes gently and just bring your attention back into the room. And yeah, that's the body scan. So yeah, the body scan is a really lovely practice, kind of simple. And again, it's actually normally done, well, it can be done isolated, so you can kind of just practice it whenever you want. It's really, really good for falling asleep. So at the end of the day, you can use it to kind of get yourself off to sleep, or if you wake up in the middle of the night, you can use it to, again, like bring yourself back into sleep. It's really, really nice if you suffer with things like high adrenaline. I used to personally have really bad anxiety when I was younger. And I have had a few panic attacks as well in the past. And this is one of the things that when I was 18, my therapist gave me this tool of like bringing your awareness back in the body, do a full body scan, because it's very like, it gives you a little bit of a sort of like paced sensation to your body. So you're gently scanning all the way up and then you're scanning all the way down. You can do it a few times, like up and down. You don't have to just do once. And then this idea of like periodically coming back to your breath. So every time you scan past a part of your body where you feel the breath, you focus on the breath, and then, yeah. And then you can also do it as at the beginning or the end of a meditation practice. So it's a nice kind of like buffer to coming in or out of your meditation. And it's often also practiced in yoga. So if you're in a yoga class, they tend to do this at the end before you find Shavasana, which is like your meditation practice. So yeah, that's the body scan. And yeah, I hope you found some of that helpful. I know it's a little bit of a like fast track race through lots of different traditions, which obviously have like thousands of years of history behind some of them. So I hope I've done enough justice to some of those ideas. But yeah, all of those, I think the main idea that I have with my work is that like these are practices that you can sort of choose to integrate into your life however you need to and however they serve you. So my recommendation would be to try different things out, maybe try a little meaning tracker or like the values stuff, or meditation, mindfulness, body scans, whatever, a little Sabbath practice, or bookend monastic type stuff. See what works for you, leave the stuff that doesn't, take the stuff that does, and yeah, just craft your life in a way that feels meaningful and deep to you. So yeah, hope that was helpful. And any questions at all, happy to answer. I do have to jump off in a sec, but you can always reach me wherever you need, wherever I can be reached. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Eloise. I personally feel very relaxed after doing that. I'm not sure about everybody else. Yeah, I've popped your link in the chat there to your website. So yeah, go find Eloise there for more information. And yeah, thanks so much for everyone joining us tonight. Hope you have a nice rest of your evening, and hopefully see you at another event soon.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.